I would love to unpack a bit about your spiritual journey. It is fascinating to me how you went from being an agnostic to a Christian to possibly an atheist and now a Christian again. I'd love to hear what you learned on your journey and maybe how's this time around Christianity different for you?
I was brought up in like the most dilute form of cultural Christianity. So it wasn't that there was none, but my parents were not. My mum, I think, didn't believe anything. And my dad, I think, probably did, but was so quiet about it that you would never know. No conversations about it. There was like occasional visits to a very elderly and ailing Methodist church where there was about 7 women in there. I mean, I thought they were in their 80s, but probably they were like now like badass middle-aged women who, if I met now, I'd really respect. But you know what you're like when you're a child. That church didn't leave much of an impression on me. And then I was invited to a church youth group and then a church youth camp by a friend who wanted to introduce me to a boy that she fancied. And I went to the church youth camp driven primarily by hormones, basically, and the accessibility of sugar. And then had this very profound... So I'm used to talking in sort of psychological, secular spaces, and they would say an ecstatic experience, a mystical experience. There's all these categories. I was just like an absolutely remarkably powerful. I physically fell on the floor. Still, like the memory of it still makes all the hairs on my arms stand up, and yeah, there's no words for it. But I met God, like that's how I explained it then. And I'm sort of broadly comfortable explaining it that way now, although I had a long time trying to explain it away. But it was all very emotional. And I was nerd girl, right? I was Hermione Granger. I was very intellectually motivated in ways that did not at all intersect with my faith. They were in like entirely separate boxes. And then that wasn't sustainable forever. And I got a job at the BBC working on a television program about the Bible. And in studying the Bible for the first time amongst kind of graduates who had studied the Bible and thinking about, you know, sources and historical timelines and biblical archaeology, and wow, there's a really bleak, dark whole like books in here that I'd never even opened because they weren't cozy and cuddly, and had you'd now call it a deconstruction. I don't know if that language is familiar with you guys, but I just thought it was like the realization that I'd been a complete idiot and built my life on a massive lie. I wrote the other day, and when I was reflecting on this, it was like finding out your first love was a sociopath. It was like, wow, the bottom fell out of my life.
To have had that extraordinary experience, which is still moving for you.
Yeah.
Of intimacy, of certainty, of experiencing, and then to have that all fall out. At a young age, as a young adult, must have been somewhat almost annihilating.
Yeah, it was horrific. I was in my early 20s and I'd built my whole identity on this thing by that point. I remember I was just like, who am I? Who am I going to be? My experience of like trying to find an alternative was that the floor kept dropping out of that as well. I was like, well, is there any meaning? Why should we live towards the good? And I know I've got some of my best friends are incredibly morally serious, seemingly quite contented atheists. So I know it's possible, but I couldn't pull it off. I was like really temperamentally unsuited to being an atheist. And I also just couldn't seem to shake God off. There was this like, go away. conversation going. I don't believe in you. That's what I was. That I would keep finding my internal monologue would be like, I don't believe in you, and then I'd be like, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in it. I don't believe in God. Stop talking to him. So yes, that sense that some deep part of me was still carrying on a conversation with the divine that my mind kept trying to shut down, eventually just wasn't very tenable. So I sort of reluctantly found my way back.